All right, welcome back to the Psych and Theo podcast. This is Tim and Sam, or Sam and Tim, depending on which order you prefer. And we are wrapping up our series on spiritual warfare and demonic possession. If you haven't listened to the first 3 episodes, please go back and listen to those first, because the answers we give in this episode will not make sense unless you listen to those 3. So we did 2 just on biblical warfare or biblical worldview in spiritual warfare, how to understand the nature of the battle that we are in and the nature of the entities, let's say, that we are in battle with.
Cosmic Rebellion.
Cosmic Rebellions, yeah. And then I didn't make that up. That's Dr. Heiser's phrase. And then the 3rd episode was just about mental health and demonic possession. How should we understand these 2 fields? And even understanding the overlap between them. That theme came up a lot in that episode of we want to be careful not to conflate them, but there does seem to be a lot of overlap. So, all right. So I think in this episode, we're going to do a quick Q&A on some questions that we realized we didn't quite answer fully, and that the listeners may want answers to. And then I think after this, if you guys have more questions, post them in the comments on Instagram or elsewhere, and just let us know if there's other questions that we maybe didn't get to, or that have come up since listening to these episodes that we could answer for you. So I'm sure there's a lot. All right, let's get into it.
Okay. Let's ask our questions here. So we're going to do real Q&A style here, as we, again, to Tim's point, listen to the first 3 episodes so that you can tie it together with these questions that I'm about to ask Tim, and it'll definitely start to make a lot more sense. So this is a question I think that a lot of Christians have asked throughout the years, and definitely probably comes up in church, and you have your typical answer to it. But today we're going to get Tim's answer and his well-researched answer on the question, can Christians be possessed?
Yeah. So the answer to this question has to do with semantics. And it's really important not to dodge indirectly, because if someone's like, yes or no, yes, answer me, yes or no. It's not, we have to dig into the semantics of where we came up with this term demon possession, because that phrase is not in the Bible. Demon possessed is not in the Bible. If you think about it as a hyphenated term, it's not in the Bible. What is in the scriptures is a term that means, if you were to translate it properly, where I'm getting this is some of the accounts in the New Testament where a person who it says they have an unclean spirit, or they were filled with an unclean spirit, or they were it's a verb that, if you translate it properly, means demonized. Like they were influenced. They're being influenced by a demonic entity, or controlled in some way. The King James translation of the Bible is credited with the phrase demon possession, that this translating that as the person was demon possessed. And that's where we get the term demon possession. And has spawned this distinction between possession and oppression, you say. So you'll hear Christians debate this today by saying, no, Christians can't be demon possessed. They can be oppressed. So they make that distinction, but the real, I think the better way to understand this, and Dr. Heiser goes into this in his book on demons. At the last chapter, he answers this question. Dr. Appleby in his book explains this almost in the same way that Heiser does. That a better term than demon possession is demonized, and that's not a black and white. That's like an on or off, black or white binary choice. It's a spectrum where demonization can go from degrees of minor degrees to very severe degrees of demonization and demonic influence. Demon possession, I would say, if I had to answer it categorically, to say no, that Christians can't be demon possessed, because possession implies ownership. And if a Christian in the New Testament, a Christian is owned by Jesus, by the Holy Spirit. We're sealed by the Holy Spirit. Okay. But that doesn't mean that we can't be influenced We see examples of that. I mentioned Ananias in a previous episode, where Ananias, who is a Christian, and his wife Sapphira, they come into the temple, or the church, and they're pretending to give all their money, and they're really only giving half.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter says, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus looks at Peter at one point and says, Satan, get behind me. Now, he's not saying Satan is possessing Peter, but he's saying, Peter, you're acting like Satan, who opposes the will of God. So Christians can be influenced. I mean, Paul warns Timothy that in the latter days, there's some people, and he's talking about Christians, who will be drawn away by the doctrine, the teachings of demons. Yeah. There are teachers in the church who, for all intents and purposes, are, like, from what we can tell, are believers, but can be deceived by evil spirits in their teaching. So there's different levels and degrees of influence, and we would call that demonization. So when we come to a situation where someone is like what we would think of as possession, where it's a severe form of control and manifestation of supernatural knowledge and power and things like that, that would be a severe degree of demonization. And I think I'm just speaking not as an expert here, but a Christian probably would have to do a lot of things to get to that point. It's not something that you can just stumble into, let's say. Yeah, that's my opinion on that. So categorically, no, Christians can't be possessed because they can't be owned by Satan. But influenced, like demonized, yeah, I think so. I think there's evidence for that in the scriptures.
And to clarify, to be demonized, would that be similar to, and get back to semantics, I guess, with this, is that similar to being oppressed?
Yeah. Okay. Essentially, it's the same meaning that we would say, but in general, the distinction of possession and oppression is just not really helpful and clear. Okay. Demonization is more. It's more broad term, but it's more correct. It's a more precise term to think about, because there's degrees, of influence. You can be influenced to a high degree, let's say. Yeah.
It's good. So if Satan knows he can't win, why does he keep fighting?
Man, I love this question because there's all kinds of theories about it. And as I tell my students, because they would ask me this question, I'm like, well, I'm not going to ask him. I'm not going to call him up and ask him, There's kind of two main views I kind of go back and forth on with this. Okay. Now there's more than two views, but these are the two that if you listen to the first two episodes on just the biblical worldview, cosmic rebellions, spirit, the unseen realm, it's kind of two views. The first view is Heiser's view, and I think there's a good amount of evidence to this, that Satan, well, let me give you the first view first, because it's less popular and it's not as many people hold this. The first view I would say that I kind of struggle with and sometimes think about is that Satan might actually think he can win. He's so conceited and prideful. The scriptures, if the passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel are really describing Satan, he says in his heart, I will be like the Most High. I will rise to the level of the Most High. So he could be very, very conceited into believing that he actually can win. I kind of struggle with that one, because logically we think, well, God is the greatest possible being. He can't not exist. He's omnipotent, omniscient, all these things. So how conceited would Satan have to be to believe that he can win? I don't know. There's some mysteries there in the spiritual realm that I won't dare, delve into. But that's one view, is that they actually think they can win. But the more likely view is and this is what Heiser explains, is that the second coming of Christ is explicitly connected to the activity of the church. Paul explains this in I think it's Romans 11, where he says, he's describing God's plan for Israel and the people of Israel. And he says, once when the fullness of the Gentiles comes, God's going to turn back to the people of Israel to graft them back in. Okay. And Paul's intent to go to Spain which at that time was the ends of the earth that they knew, the farthest edge of the known world at that point. Paul, he says this at the end of Romans, I plan to go to Spain. Paul is trying to take the gospel as far as he can because he understands that the second coming of Christ is linked to this thing that he calls the fullness of the Gentiles. When all of the Gentiles that God sees as sufficient for the kingdom are brought into the kingdom, then he will turn back to Israel. And I think that's when the end times really kicks off. Mm. If Satan knows that as well, then they like the Satan and the principalities and powers these are the ones we wrestle with that Paul says in Ephesians 6. They are contending with us and they're contending with the church and the expanse of the church and the effectiveness of the church to take the gospel to the world. So if Satan can disrupt the church through division, infighting, persecution, and other things, if he can continue to do that, then he can keep this war going on for a long, long time. So if he doesn't think he can win, why does he keep fighting? Well, he might be so conceited to think that we can keep this going on forever because he's just, dealing with a bunch of little meat sacks who don't know anything.
Yeah, the sin of pride runs deep with them, huh?
Yeah, we're a bunch of little sheep. What do we know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. I like that explanation of those two camps. Another one. What's the role of angels in spiritual warfare? Because there's a lot of talk about, well, do we have guardian angels? And what would be their role if we do have them? But yeah, actually, that one was one I haven't even thought about just because I personally didn't believe that, but I'm interested to hear kind of how you respond to this one about the guardian angels.
Yeah. So there's debate about whether we have guardian angels or not. I do think there's some biblical evidence for this idea. I don't think it's crazy. There's scant evidence though. So the Matthew 18, Jesus mentions that, hey, don't harm these little ones, these children, for their angels are see the face of God. They go before the face of God. So it's a opaque kind of reference, but Jesus mentions little children having angels.
What reference was that?
It's Matthew 18, I think. Another reference that's very clear, I think more clear, is Acts 12, and this is where Peter is thrown in prison, and this is an angel comes to him, gets him out of prison, breaks him out, and then Peter goes to the house where the other disciples are hiding. And he's knocking on the door, and the young woman comes to the gate and realizes it's Peter, and she runs back into the house and tells the other disciples, "Hey, it's Peter out there." And they're like, "No, it's not. It's his angel. Like it's his it must be his angel that's come." There's a couple different views about that, like what they would have believed, whether they believed it was actually Peter's spirit before it had gone to heaven that was kind of roaming around, or if believers have an angel that maybe mimics their appearance or looks like them sometimes and watches over them. But that's another kind of example. The other one that's often cited is Revelation 2 and 3, the letters to the seven churches. I think this is a pretty clear one because Jesus says to the angel of Pergamum, to the angel of Ephesus, angel of Pergamum, angel of Smyrna. He addresses the angels of these seven churches. Now some will say, well, angel means messenger, so he could be referring to the head elder or pastor of those churches. I don't think that's a correct view, given how the word angel is used throughout the entire book of Revelation. So it does seem to be that the angel that Jesus is addressing is a stand-in for the church itself. So like the angel itself has some sort of guardianship or stewardship role in that church. And there seems to be this relationship between how the church is behaving and the angel's stewardship of that church. There's some different views. I don't want to be dogmatic about any of that, but yeah, so I think there's some evidence for us having guardian angels. When it comes to the role of spiritual warfare, where is it? The book of Hebrews talks about that there's angels, that they're ministering spirits, that they minister to believers, that they help believers, and that, in the admonition for us to be hospitable, the author of Hebrews reminds us that even some have entertained angels unaware, and he's referring to the passage about Abraham. Okay, so there are, I think it's not unreasonable to think that there are angels walking among us, physically, or
physically. What do you mean? Like
bodies?
people?
Yeah, bodies. I mean, that's in the Old Testament. They show up and they have bodies. They can somehow take on corporeal form. Now, but
they don't look like humans, or they do?
No, they do look like humans.
Oh,
I mean, even the story of Lot and the angels that go inside, they are seen as men. Now, there's some, I won't get into some theories on that, but basically they're called men.
Yeah.
The men of Sodom say, hey, there's two men that have come to you. So sometimes angels appear as men. Sometimes they appear as like fiery warrior hosts. Their functions relate to whatever God is accomplishing in the world. And so when they minister to believers, they're helping us accomplish God's will in the world. They're not like these bellboys or butlers,
right?
That can just do things for us. That is not how they work, at least if you follow the New Testament.
Sure. And there were angels that ministered to Jesus as well, right?
Yep. Oh yeah. Yep. That's that would be the passage where he goes into the wilderness and he's tempted by Satan. Yeah. So with spiritual warfare, though, the Catholics have a view of this where you can call down the assistance of angels and combating the demonic and the satanic. I don't see any scriptural evidence for that. I don't think that's appropriate. Now Catholics are going to disagree with me on that. Okay.
Do you have any reference that they use, like Psalm 9?
I don't. So I don't know. I actually don't know where they would base that. I'm going to guess it's on some tradition that they have, or maybe apocryphal literature, because I'm not aware of any biblical reference that they would use for that justification. Maybe I'm wrong, but again, I just, when I see the confrontation of spiritual evil with the church in the New Testament, there's not an activity of the church calling in angels to do things.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So that's my view on that.
Okay. So we're talking about kind of like the good guys, the good angels, right? And then we have.
Let me just say one thing, and I think Heiser makes a good point of this, like the incredible humility of the heavenly hosts. They're called the heavenly hosts, the holy ones. They have incredible humility because they don't seek their own glory. They seek to do the will of God. And if they're assigned to us, I mean, imagine how I mean, they're not God. So that I imagine they could, at least feel in some way like, again, I don't want to delve too deeply in speculation here, but angels could at times, okay, one gets held up by the Prince of Persia. So like, they have limitations. So it's like, imagine they get assigned to us, and they're like, oh man, this human, he's messing up again. I don't know, who knows?
Yeah. Well, that just made me think of, oh gosh, what was I going to say in regards to that with the angels?
There's also different ranks of the angels, like the seraphim are around the throne of God.
Yes.
All the time. That's.
And that's what it was, I think. So you have the different ranks and levels of angels. And then there's I forget the passage, I'm sure you'll know it, where it says that he's made us, a little more above, or a little above,
little lower,
a little lower than the angels.
Yeah. It says, what is man that you are mindful of him? That you would, I can't remember that. I don't want to butcher that verse, but it says you have made him a little lower. Are you ready for this? It's not angel, it's Elohim. You've made him a little lower than the Elohim. Remember I was explaining that word can be a improper general plural noun for the watcher class, or like the heavenly, the divine council. So human beings have been made a little lower than the spiritual beings, the Elohim. And that term is, when you get to the New Testament, the term angel basically refers to any guys on the good side, mostly.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been made a little lower. And when Hebrews says, when Christ takes on human form, he gets made and taking on human form, he becomes a man and therefore is made a little lower than the angels for a time in accepting that the form of a servant, as Philippians 2 says. But here's the cool part. John explains this in his opening chapter in the Gospel of John. And you see this with Paul when he explains to the Corinthians, like we're going to judge angels. Human beings, as they're redeemed and they're brought into the kingdom of God, John says, to those who believed in his name, he gave them the right to be called the children of God. Paul says that, do you not know, Corinthians, that you're going to judge angels one day? Now, that doesn't mean like we're going to be the boss of all the angels, but God is replacing, he is inviting human beings back into his family in that divine council of rulership, into our role that he designed for us as being rulers on the earth. And part of that rulership is judging the angels that rebelled.
Wow. Dude, I love how you tie everything together. That's great. That's good. So, so I guess that moves it. I was talking about good guy angels, right? And then we have, I guess, the demons would be the bad angels. Or if there aren't fallen angels, then what are they?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So if demons aren't fallen angels, so there's two views here. What the classic view, as I said, is that demons are fallen angels. They fell with Satan either before the Garden of Eden or sometime after that. So Satan's the dragon, Revelation 2, the dragon sweeps a third of the stars down with him. The classic view is that that's a third of the angels rebelled with Satan, and that's where we get the demons. I think the more interesting view, and I think the view that really makes a lot of sense from the New Testament, and now brace yourselves, folks, but is the other view is the Nephilim theory, that demons, so there are fallen angels, the watcher, the sons of God in Genesis 6, the sons of God from Genesis 10 and 11, and possibly some others in Revelation 12, if that rebellion refers to one that occurred at the incarnation. So there are fallen angels, let's say, but if demons are distinct from that, the view of the early church and of most of Judaism in the Second Temple period, that's the time between the silent years and the New Testament, is that demons are disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim, which were the giants. So you have to accept first that the Nephilim were this hybrid species of the angel human hybrids that had supernatural power, and they were a perversion of creation that God wiped out in the flood. And then later they show up again in the land of Canaan. And that's the giant clans that the Israelites talk about when they're coming into the land of Canaan. And the Israelites wiped them out too. So the Nephilim, the giants in the Old Testament, all get wiped out. And here's the cool part. The last giant that gets wiped out is Goliath.
He was the last one?
Well, he's symbolic. He's either the last one or one of his brothers is the last one. But he is symbolic of, so who kills him?
David.
Yeah. So the line of David wipes out the line of the Nephilim. Okay.
That's awesome.
So that connection, if you understand that connection, when you get to the New Testament, their view of demons being the disembodied spirits of these giants that roam the earth. So if they're these spirits that are neither fully angel nor fully human, like where do they go? Where do they belong? This is the thinking in the Jewish mind. So they are basically spirits of the air. They roam the earth and they seek to be re-embodied. There's some Jewish traditions like the Book of Enoch, and some others that allude to this thinking in the Jewish mindset. Now it sounds kind of crazy, but there's some overlap in the New Testament for this. And the people who usually dismiss this theory as like crazy crackpot usually are not aware of the scholarship behind this argument, because that scholarship is very recent based on the documents that have been uncovered and translated and things like that. So, but this was actually the view of the early church up until the time of Augustine. There was one guy named Julius Africanus who proposed that the Genesis 6 wasn't about hybrid species, but was like the Sethite and the Canaanite, the lines of Seth and Cain, mixing not angels and humans, but outside of Julius Africanus in the 3rd century and then Augustine in the 4th century, every church father that we know of that we have a citation for believed that the Nephilim were the disembodied spirits of the giants. And in Jewish theology, prior to the New Testament, we see this thinking too. So this was the dominant view of the time, and you see that in you see hints of that in the New Testament where demons are called unclean spirits, which is a reference back to the Old Testament law. The examples of like, or just thinking the demons seeking to possess things. When again that account when the demons, the man of the Gerasenes asks Jesus, "What do you have to do with the Son of the Most High?" So that's a title from the Old Testament. So the demon is using legion, which is a military term. Again, think back like who were the Nephilim? At least in the Jewish mind, the Nephilim were these ancient warrior kings from old. And in the Old Testament, they're called different things. They're called the Rephaim. They're the Anakim or the Anakites. There's some other names I'm drawing a blank on right now, but essentially when this demon possessed man encounters Jesus, he says, "What do you have to do with the Son of the Most High?" That's that term from the Old Testament, Elohim, Elohim, the Most High. So the demon is using a title that would have been used to distinguish God from the other Elohims. And he recognizes Jesus as the Son of the Most High. So he's distinct from the other sons of God. He is the only begotten Son of God. So he's important. And this demon has that legion military term, which it would correspond to these ancient warrior kings. That's a loose connection, but yeah. And then they say, have you come to torment us before the time? And in Jewish theology, demons were permitted by God to roam the earth for a certain amount of time until the judgment day. And then they would be cast into the lake of fire along with their fathers. So that's a long answer to that theory, but that's the theory about the Nephilim, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. Like that's that demon theory. So what does that do for us? I don't know. I have to do some more thinking on if that really changes anything for us when it comes to dealing with the problem of demonic possession in this world. One of my friends, who's a theologian as well, I think he's probably got some better thinking on this. I couldn't quote him right now and explain what the relevance of that is for common day demon possession. But anyway, that's the theory. Anyway, so
yeah,
okay,
that's good. One or two questions that will probably help our audience a lot is sometimes we're not always aware of how sins or things that we're involved with can provide openings for demonic possession or just for an attack in a sense. So are there doorways or pathways of spiritual warfare / demonization that are more specific than sin? Are there specific sins or activities that would elicit a spiritual attack?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak from this based on what I've read and listened to from guys who deal with this, like the Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, people who have dealt with exorcism, let's say. So I'm going to reference them and defer to them on this. But anything dealing with the occult, including board games like the Ouija board, but it could also be very trauma can be a doorway as well. Again, these are not necessary connections. I would say the occult is a pretty wide open door, but like any form of divination or
New Age spirituality.
Yeah, that stuff's a wide open door. You're really playing. You're literally, well, not literally playing with fire, but you're metaphorically playing with fire. But things like sexual sin is a big one that is referenced a lot as far as like a doorway.
What do you mean reference?
By people who deal with deliverance ministries. It's like sexual sin or sexual trauma. It can be a doorway. Yeah. Things this is an interesting one, like curses, like people speaking curses, which there's some debate about how much power, like if someone speaks a curse over another person, how much power there is. There's debate in evangelical circles about that. So I won't be too dogmatic about that one. But yeah, like I think false teaching, certain forms of false teaching can open you up to demonic influence.
I mean, even I think on that, people don't even realize it sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a scary one.
I do, but just to comfort people in this, that it doesn't seem to be that demonic influence is something that you can just kind of like accidentally come into. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but because some people get really paranoid and they think like, oh, like I turned left instead of right, and I said a curse word. Now I'm demonized or something. I don't know. I don't have a view into the spiritual world, so I can't say that for certain, but it seems to be very deliberate, willful things that people do, like a willful decision to sin, willful decision to get involved in the occult and other things like that. Blasphemy, playing around, even if you're not like going full bore into the occult stuff, but just dabbling or playing around, making light of the spiritual world, I think is dangerous. So anything like that. Yeah. The reason I say that is because some people just want to chalk it up to like, well, spiritual warfare is just about dealing with sin in your life. It's like, well, yeah, in a general sense, yeah, but there is this more specific form that we've been talking about for 4 episodes now. Yeah. And so we want to give specific answers to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think expanding on that, creating some level of awareness as well as some information that they can use, that Christians can use to combat this and be aware of this reality.
So one last thing, I tell my students this: the supernatural is real, the paranormal is real, but don't believe everything you hear. Sometimes people lie. Sometimes they're just crazy. And sometimes there's charlatans out there everywhere. So you got to filter everything through scripture and through the Holy Spirit too. John says in 1 John, test the spirits. You have to test them. And I think you do that through the counsel of believers too. I'm
into that, brother.
So theology is a love for the truth and a war for the truth.
Oh, I love that. Good quote. All right.
That's my quote. I made that up.
Did you?
Yeah.
I'm going to quote you on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you for joining us for these last couple of episodes. You guys asked for this, right? The spiritual warfare and how this applies to life, how this applies to counseling. So hopefully you guys enjoy this series, enjoy this Q&A, and we look forward to hearing more about your topics. Remember to message us through Instagram or send us through email at psychandtheo@gmail.com. And remember, as always, leave us reviews. Let us know how you're enjoying the show. That's always encouraging for us. We'll see you next time.